Examine for a death woman. James is at 30s, but he got more than 10 years experience in medical industry. That was because his grandfather was a prestigious, well-horned doctor of traditional Chinese medicine. When he was a child, he had studied Chinese medicine from his grandfather. At only 6, while the other kids were learning how to spell, he was able to distinguish 20 different traditional medicine prescriptions. White peony helps in arterial plaques reduction, decreasing the blood pressure, saving the livers, breaking the fever and nightly sweats, and also as a tonic. He was just 6 and knew those stuff very well. Astoundingly, he didn't stop at classifying and calling those herbs names. He had understood what those herbs use for. He had been praised for his potential and cleverness. Eventually, he had applied to a medical university and spent 7 years to study about Western medicine. After graduation, he had spent his next 3 years to intern at a district hospital. The heads of HTV department was very satisfied with his contribution as well as his attitudes during working there, so they had offered him a job after he finished his internship. That was a very attractive opportunity to most of people, but not for James. He had his dream. He loved freedom. Didn't want to be tied up in the hospital. He loved the medicine for sure, but he had rejected the offer. Shortly, he had passed all of the exams and got his doctor's certificate. James had opened a small clinic which relocated at a quiet corner at the west of the city. He had chosen that place since he could rent with an affordable price, and on top of that, it was quite genuinely just like him. James loved the quiet, so that he could read his books without disturb. He opened the clinic to make a living, but he had mulled it over. He decided to be a doctor of traditional Chinese medicine like his grandfather. Traditional Chinese medicine was popular those days. Lots of doctors of traditional Chinese medicine was able to cure some malignancy which the modern medicine have been given up. There was an unforeseen issue which made James got some difficulties. At that time he was at his 30s, and he looked even younger than his age, so when the old patients came in, they have seen a young man at the clinic and thought they might mistaken somewhere else, then went away. James had ran after them to explain that was a traditional Chinese medicine clinic. The clinic got no customers for a while. To make a living, James had researched and opened his medical examination at home service. People could buy things, ordered food to ship to their home online, so why not diagnose by a doctor? He posted his clinic information to the social media. Luckily, besides of the well-honed medical skills, he was able to dig to technology as well. He had self-run his ads in some of the social media apps as well. Eventually, there were calls to ask about his services. One day, there was a call from a woman at 3 p.m. to book a medical examination at her house. The woman said, "Hello, Doc. Could you come over here at number 5, West Villa, apartment 404 at 3 a.m.? I'm feeling unwell." James felt there was something wrong. "Why 3 a.m., miss? Why not now? I'm available to come," he answered. He thought what kind of sickness that she is having, but asked him to come at 3 a.m. to examine. Is she a psychopath? The woman answered cold-bloodedly, "Don't worry. I pay you what you deserved, $400. Is that okay for you?" "Sounds good. I'll come at 3 a.m. Thanks for calling us." He wanted money afterwards, to live and run his clinic. The women hang up shortly then. That made James a bit confused. That was irrational to James. West Villa was the most luxury villa in the city, but the woman seemed to be a nice person, so he came to her place as scheduled. James got to the West area a bit earlier. He wanted to make it on time. He waited until 3 a.m. and rang the doorbell with nervousness, confusion and vagueness. The door of 404 opened. A woman who had a beautiful face and a hot body, who was wearing a pink sleeping dress, appears in front of him. "Hello, miss. You have booked a service from our clinic at 3 a.m. haven't you?" James had hesitated when knocking her door at that early, even he had been allowed. "Yes, that was me who called, there is only me home, common in." She politely welcomed him. She led him to the living room and let him sit down. The apartment's deco was really nice, such a luxury apartment, but James felt very uncomfortable since she let the air conditioner running with a very low temperature. Once he stepped inside, he felt like that was an ice forest. The temperature was set very low noticeably compared to outside. That was a very abnormal place to him, so he wanted to finish his job and left the place as soon as possible. He asked the woman, "So, how are you feeling? Could you please tell me your symptoms, please?" She growled tiredly. "I got some red dots on my back lately. They made me feel annoyed and look ugly. Could you help me to remove them?" James instantly recalled some of the sicknesses my cause and the traditional medicine for that already, but he wanted to see them by his eyes for sure. He asked politely, "Would you mind letting me see those red dots on your back?" She turned her back toward him and took off her dress so that he could see her back. James came a bit closer to see clearly those red dots. He recognized those red dots were kind of only appear in a death body. How came that happening in a living body? Since James drowned to the silence a while, she asked, "What do you think? That is really ugly, isn't that? Could you help me to remove it?" James pulled himself together, set aside the death body stuff though aside. He focused to those red dots. Traditional Chinese medicine has listen, look, smell methods to examine. "Would you mind letting me touch those red dots?" "Sure. No worries, you could touch those." She agreed. James reached up her back with his hands. He felt her ice skin instantly and like there was a cold breeze flew in by his body. He tried to keep calm and put his index finger to one of the red dots and squeeze it. It became a little bit lighter. When he took his hand back, the red dot turned to its initial state. James's eyebrow was furrowed slightly. That touch proved his first thought was true. During his internship, he had a chance to check lots of dead bodies in the morgue. He was really sure about that. James had been struggled to tell the woman his examination. He was afraid that he would scare her out. "This is just a rash. No worries. I'll give you a prescription. Just follow it and you're gonna recover for sure." He lay to her about his examination, but his prescription is really gonna work on a death body. When he was a child, he used to herd from his grandfather. There was a traditional subscription for that symptom. Grinding red peonies root to powder, then adding some wine and rub to the red dots. That would remove the red dots in a short amount of time for sure. He was confusing if the prescription works in a living body since that is only applied to death body so far. The woman's eyes seemed to be light up. "Really? They could be removed. Sounds good. How long does it take to completely remove those dots from my back?" James scratched his head and was a bit afraid about her concern. "You gotta wait for 2 days to be sure if it work. Anyways, what wrong? Do you want to have a quicker healing progress?" She gave him a blushing smile. "My husband is nearly home after a long business trip. I don't want him to see those dots in my body." Then, she changed the topic. She didn't likely talk too much about her husband. "Here, I pay you $200. James surprised. "What, we had a deal with $400, hadn't we?" She gave a smile on him, with a shrewd look. "No worries, if your prescription works, I'll come to your clinic myself to pay the rest. You know my place, I'm not a liar." James had no objection. He didn't care about the rest, since $200 is not worth it. He took his $200 then left the apartment. A couple days later, everything turned to nostalgia. James had been too busy with his clinic work. The 3rd days after that night, after reading, he laid down to read the news on his smartphone. He accidentally saw a piece of news with the title, "Suicide at West Villa." He recalled West Villa was where he had come to check up a few days earlier. He started curious. He had clicked to read the news. He had startled with the photo of the article. There was a picture of the victim in the middle. She was too familiar to him. He realized that was the woman he had met up earlier. James recalled the whole irrational thing that night. He concluded the woman had been died before that night. He got frozen then. It turned out he had paid a visit to a dead woman. Suddenly, his heart had beaten faster and faster. He wanted to scroll down the article. He was looking for another thing. Here it was. The photo had been taken in the suicide scene. The woman laid on the ground, which was exposing her back. She had been covered up her face by the writer, but James was still able to recognize the apartment's deco. His eyes caught the woman's back. Her back was as smooth as pearls and her red dots had been gone. James had been glazed over. The woman's voice was echoing on his head. "No worries, if your prescription works, I'll come to your clinic myself to pay the rest. You know my place, I'm not a liar." At that moment, he heard a knock sound. James panicked. He was scaring what he was thinking of. Then he had settled down. He didn't done anything wrong. He helped that woman, so he didn't have to be scared. James get up, took on his shoes and went to the front door. Once he opened the door, a cold breeze flew by his face, and the woman really came to see him here. The one had suicide at West Villa. She stood at the front door, and passed James $200 in her hand. "I make my promise, your prescription works very well. Thank you so much, here is your $200 left." James heavily swallowed his saliva and hesitated. Should he receive the money? The woman laughed out loud when seeing him like that. "Take it. You deserve it. Thanks to you my husband didn't see me to become ugly." James curiously asked the reason why she had suicided. "Pardon, you are beautiful and living an abundant life. Why did you end up your life like that?" The woman bore a sad face and replied, "I have got an incurable disease. The treatment might blow me and my husband tons of money. On top of that, I didn't want my husband to see me to become ugly, scrawny, dying day by day. I wanted him to see me at my best." She didn't seem want to continue. She faced up James. "You are a good doctor. I wish your business is gonna flourish. Goodbye." Then she turned away. That night, James gave his eyes follow her shadow. She was like a white slight petal flying in darkness. She faded out to the night just like that.